once again, we have Keith presenting today. This time it is on the Falcon F16 and version 5 and everything that's new with that. Over to you, Keith.
Thanks, Daryl. Okay, so for the last few years, feels like forever, I've been working with Dave on the Falcon controllers, specifically the V4 and now the V5s. These were first demonstrated at the recent Christmas Expo. Dave was there with Daryl Collins, and they were running through the functionality. We thought we'd take the opportunity to provide an update on the functionality, maybe give a broader group of people an opportunity to ask any questions and answer some of the bigger questions which I know are out there. So I'm going to go into this. So the V5 suite is really a full replacement of not just the controllers, but the smart receivers and even the power injection boards. And essentially is a recognition that there's been some really unfortunate fires and the like in the recent few years that have been down to unfortunately some of the lower quality elements that we all end up having to use in our displays, because that's where this stuff comes from. And we wanted to look at what we could do to make shows safer, but also recognizing the opportunity that such changes might introduce, and make sure that we solve the problem in its entirety, not just poke at the edges, but then leave big gaps through which lots of problems could still occur. So we are introducing the V5 line of controllers. Right now, we're working on the F16. There will be a 32 local port controller, and there will be an upgrade to the F48 as well. The 32 and the 48 are going to come later, potentially before Christmas, but if they are, they'll be very late and probably not ready for this year's season, whereas the F16 should be. Look, Falcon's been around a lot longer than I've been involved in this hobby, or even working with Dave. And the controllers really have set the pace in terms of a whole bunch of things. There's a number of things that we focused very much on to make sure that we're delivering, and I wanted to highlight some of these things because not all controllers focus on the same things. Other controllers make different choices around what they optimize for, but these are the ones that when Dave and I are sitting there and debating whether this feature or that feature should work this way, whether that thing should be added to the board or not, these are some of the things that we're keeping in mind. Flexibility is definitely a key one. We definitely want controllers that are flexible and able to support, different pixels, different configurations, things that grow with you as your show expands. While there are people out there that only ever put up a string or two and that's it, there are lots of other people who start at the smaller end but grow into larger shows, potentially multiple controllers, etc. And they want a platform that will grow with them and flex with them as they go. Simple is very, very important to us. When we built the web UI for the V4, there was no reason why it had to look like the V3. We chose to do it that way because we wanted to keep things not just consistent, but consistent and simple. Minimize the amount of clutter, hide the advanced features away where they need to be hidden away. To the largest degree, we try to push everything back into xLights for those that are using xLights, and made it as simple as possible to configure there. And then everything else we wanted to keep super simple and super easy to configure. We wanted things that were reliable, things that just turned on when you turn it on. When you turn it on, 3 seconds later, the controller's up and running. In fact, on the V4, the controller's actually up and running before the splash screen even goes away. I had to put in special code to hold the splash screen for longer because David wanted to see the Falcon logo on the OLED. The thing boots up that quickly. If it wasn't for the need for a network connection, it would be less than 1/10 of a second to boot up and be running and ready to output to pixels. Yeah, we wanted things that were just always on. There was no dependency on external parts, no dependency on SD cards or anything else, just a controller that would turn on and work. With the V5, Dave's always been very focused on safety, and for the longest time has had things like reverse polarity detection and overcurrent detection and fuses and all sorts of things to try and minimize the chance that a user will damage their controller or do other things. With this release, we are introducing the eFuses and the control that they allow us to provide over the power that is coming, not just out of the main controller board, but out of your smart receivers and even your power injection boards. So when you choose to turn your show off, you can turn it off in its entirety, not just bits and pieces of it. We've always tried to strive for extensive protocol support. It would be very easy to just write a controller that just does WS2811, but we always have those group of people that have this pixel or that pixel that wants it to work, and we've always strived to provide support for those different protocols. We've always tried to keep our support well and available. Dave still has his mobile phone number on his website, and if you need to call him and ask a question, he's always willing to take those calls. We do have local availability in the USA, the UK, and Australia, so controllers are available around the world. And we've generally, support's been enduring. While we're not updating the V3 firmware as we used to, we are still supporting those things. We where the firmware's available, it continues to be available. It's upload, you can update to different versions. The upload from xLights into the controllers continues to be fully supported, and we've got no plans to remove any of that sort of stuff. If you buy a controller, we expect it to be upgraded. And as you'll find out with the V5 and the V4 actually share a significant amount of the code base, such that we are going to be continuing to update the V4 firmware as part of the V5. And in fact, we're already starting to see features go back into the V4 firmware as a result of the V5 changes. So that's what we're about. That's what Dave and I are about when it comes to the Falcon boards and as a vendor. Falcon's been the first on a whole bunch of stuff, whether it was virtual strings, the adding of the OLED, the smart remotes, active cooling available on the boards, controller switches, expansion boards, etc. All of those things appeared on Falcon first. And with the V5, we now introduce the eFuses across the entire ecosystem. I think the FPP controllers have started to introduce eFuses, but we're adding them front to back on all the boards, allowing you to totally turn off your show. We're also introducing for the first time two-way smart and remote communications, allowing the controller to actually actively monitor the smart receivers, which provides you with greater insight and understanding of what's going on in your show, and also the greater ability to control it. We've also made the smart remotes upgradable, so we can field upgrade the firmware, which means that as we introduce more advanced functionality, the risk that we've got a bug which results in receivers that are unable to do things goes down significantly, and makes it possible for us to also introduce capabilities and fine-tune capabilities over time. As until you get things in production, you don't see all the bugs. There's always the odd thing that pops up here and there. So let's talk more specifically about what's changing on the main board. We have removed a couple of things, and I'll start there. So all of the pluggable single-use fuses are gone. So all those orange fuses that you previously had on your controllers have all removed, and new eFuses, which are just look like other chips on the board, have been added. We did drop 2 of the input pins. The input pins were not commonly used, but allowed you to put an external button onto the board and have it trigger certain actions to be taken. We did drop 2 of those pins, and the reason we dropped them is because we chose to add instead some external fuse control pins that allow us to turn off power injection boards and thus fully cut the power to your show even when you're using power injection. So we decided that that made sense. The other thing that we have dropped is we have dropped the expansion headers, so you can no longer add additional local ports or receiver sending boards to the F16. Instead, we've added 2 additional smart receiver ports, so every F16 is now essentially 16 local ports and 4 smart receiver chains. And we will be introducing an F32 with the 32 local ports as well, but that will come a little bit later. And of course, there will be the F48 as well. So we have added, like I said, all of those resettable and software controllable e-fuses. By that, I mean that when the fuse blows, it blows, but it doesn't damage the device, and it's possible to electrically reset the fuse. We provide 2 ways to reset, or 3 ways to reset the fuse. 1, you can power the board down and repower it, and it will reset the fuse. 2, you can press one of the onboard buttons and hold it for a second, and it will reset the fuse. And 3, we do offer the ability to control the fuses through the web user interface. So you can turn the fuses on and off, or turn the power on and off. Like I said, there are 2 additional smart receiver outputs, the 2 pins for controlling the e-fuses. For controlling the e-fuses on those external power injection boards. There is 2-way communication with those smart receivers. All that is firmware upgradable. And like I said, there will be the 32 output ports. We have kept a whole bunch of stuff, right? And when I say kept a whole bunch of stuff, we are running exactly the same code. So 2 years of debugging and fixing, etc. The F16 V5 walks to the starting grid with all of that behind it and all of those fixes in place. So we expect the firmware to be much more stable in its 1.0 release than maybe you might have seen in previous 1.0 releases. It retains 192 universes of input and the equivalent amount of DDP. It still supports up to 1024 pixels per output. It still has all the same pixel protocols that you've previously seen. It still has the local player functionality. It still has the web interface, including over Wi-Fi. It still has the full API set that it previously had with more extensions to that. It still supports DMX Renard outputs. It still has the switch, the 2-port Ethernet switch. Is back, the NS version. We've now, the supply constraints have been lifted and we're back to having the 2-port to switches on the board, so they're back. We still have the variable speed fan header that adjusts the speed of the fan according to the temperature of the board. Like I said, the Wi-Fi web access is still there. And in fact, we've also recently improved the performance of that. And that's also in the latest update to the V4 as well. And it's backward compatible with all the V4 receivers. So if you want to continue to use your V4 receivers, you can use those V4 receivers on the V5 and they will work just fine. In both dumb and smart mode. Obviously, you don't get the fuse control on the old receivers, but they will still work with it. In terms of the fuse behavior, we've changed a few things there as well. Historically, when you powered on a Falcon board, you would get a whole bunch of green lights come up, which were the lights showing that the fuse was good, and then the fuse light would go off if the fuse was blown. The downside of that is it's actually quite hard to tell if a fuse is blown or not. And so now we've moved to a model where we're using red LEDs and only lighting LEDs up when either the fuse is blown or the fuse has been actively turned off by the controller. So when the fuse is normally running, there's no lights at all. It's only when something interesting happens that those fuse lights change status. Like I said, they can be rebooted via the web UI, pressing and holding the boot button or rebooting the controller. The fuse status, as you can see down the bottom here, is actually visible in the web UI. So each and every fuse can be seen down here, including the fuses that are on the smart receivers. And you can both turn them off and reset them all in their entirety, but you can also double click on individual fuses and turn individual fuses off. And one of the things that we will be introducing, I believe before the firmware is gold, is the ability to go in and actually save that profile so that, if you choose to turn off a half dozen ports and you wanted those to always be turned off when you fire the board up, we're going to give you a way to do that. The fuses can also turn off automatically if the data is not seen for a period of time. So if the controller stops receiving data from your show player, it will turn the fuses off automatically, and you have some control over how long that takes. And the same is true with your smart receivers. If your smart receivers stop receiving data, then after a period of time, the fuses will automatically kick in and disable the power to your props. There's obviously no point having the props powered if there is no data arriving at the receiver. And that's also turn offable if that's really what you want to do. And obviously when the receiver turns off or the controller turns all of its fuses off, it also sends the instructions to that external power injection board and turns the fuses off on that as well. So all the power goes off. And then, of course, if the data starts to flow again, if the controller starts to receive data, if you put the controller in test mode, all of the fuses will resume back to their old state, unless, of course, they were blown. If they were blown, they will stay blown. One of the side effects of having the eFuses is all of our eFuses actually have a current monitoring port on them. And so we have cooked the current monitoring port up to the controller and allow the controller to monitor it. That allows us to do things like allow you to drill in and monitor a specific port and see what the current draw is. It also allows us to implement the pixel counting if you really want to count the number of pixels that are attached to the port, although the utility of that outside of the test bench seems to be fairly limited. I think that's something that you're probably better off using something like an F-test if you're just randomly counting pixels, but you can do it from the controller if you want to. Like I said, the smart remotes, they also have the eFuses. They are also locally resettable. If you hold down the test button and put it into test mode, on entering into test mode, it will reset the fuses, and then you can pop back out of test mode. Actually, no, that's not even true. If you press the button, even without going into test mode, it will reset the fuses, if that's what you want. Like I said, it has that external fuse control. It is fully backward compatible, so the new receivers will work with the V3, V4, and all the FPP controllers. There is a feature that is in the latest firmware for the V4, which enables you to turn off data sending when there is no data to be sent. And when that feature is enabled on the V4 with one of the V5 smart receivers, the smart receiver will turn its power off when it stops receiving data from the controller. And that's also behavior with FPP. So when you use the V5 smart receivers with FPP, they will automatically turn off after, I think it's 60 seconds by default. The downside with the V4 and the FPP is you obviously can't configure the smart remote, although you can update the firmware on the smart remotes from the V4. The receivers, like the latest release of the V4 receivers, all have auto protocol detection. They're all remotely monitorable. You can monitor voltage, current, and temperature on those receivers. You can do the pixel counting on the receivers, so you don't have to go out to the receiver to monitor the current or anything. That's all done remotely. And the other side effect of the way in which these boards have done is you actually can get additional distance out of the smart receivers. Historically, smart receivers, although you daisy chain them together, they've all been electrically part of a single wire with a direct pass through. With the new receivers, there is now an input and an output port on the smart receiver, and you have to plug into the right one. The side effect of this means that you actually get 300 feet of distance from between each smart receiver rather than 300 feet of distance overall. It also means that there are no more termination switches to worry about on the new smart receivers. You just plug them in and you go. So we are going to do a demo, which is going to be fun. So I'm going to stop sharing and Dave's going to share.
Can Dave share?
I believe so.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Try again.
Here you go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The video, Dave, let me get that going.
Yeah, I think you want to request.
I can't. It doesn't give me that option. Why can't I request control, Darryl?
Hold on. Here you go. Try it now. You didn't warn me about all these things you wanted.
No, I can't see that.
Collaborate, share, start. It doesn't look like that is a privilege I can give you.
Okay, well, maybe I could. It's going to be a little harder to put the camera on the. Here, just a second here.
It must have been a room setting that they did not allow.
It must be.
Okay. All right. So what do we want to try first, Keith?
All right. Let's start with, let's turn off live update on the E131 package received. Let's get rid of that. Okay. All right. So what we've got here on the board, Dave, if you want to go a little bit closer to the board, is we have a V5 board at the top. We have 3 receivers chained, A's on the right to B to C, and they're daisy chained together. Hanging off the A is an external fuse control board. You can see that it's just a 2-wire connection. Essentially, it's a data and a ground pin, etc., which enables us to turn that E-fuse board off. So if you've got a very large prop that you're controlling either from your main controller or from the smart receiver, and we obviously want to turn the power off to it. There's no point not turning off the power injection because the prop will still effectively be powered, and so this guarantees that we turn it off. And at the bottom, Dave's got a bunch of variants of his. That's the SRX2, which will be also a V5 smart receiver with E-fuses, but offers 8 ports and direct attached to a power supply. That's the E-fuse with the direct attachment. It's kind of hard to see, but the prongs that screw directly into the power supply things are on the top there. So that attaches in on the power supply. And then the other ones are other variants of those smart receivers, but they're the older ones. All right, Dave. So what we might do is we might go off and we might just, first of all, let's just turn all the fuses off. All right. So if you come over here, you can see that now all the red lights on the top are on, all of the red lights on all the smart receivers are on, and also on that external fuse control board. So there is absolutely no power that is coming out of any of those receivers. So it doesn't matter how bad your pixels have degraded. You're not going to get a pixel fire while the board is in this mode because there is no power going out to your pixels. Like I said, that can be automatically configured, and I'll show you how we'll do that in a second. All right, Dave, let's go back and turn it on and show how I can turn off a single port on either a receiver or a controller, maybe turn off one of each. So by double clicking on the ports, they turn off. Now, when it double clicks off the port, it does take a little while for it to refresh all the receiver statuses. So it'll take a little while to come back, but it's showing up those ports there as being in gray. And if you look at them on those boards, those ports are disabled. Like I said, we will provide a way for you to save that status so that when the board powers up, it remembers that if you choose to want to remember it. Dave can also go and short one of those things out. So he's going to take a wire and short a port or two out on the receivers and all the remotes. And this is a direct short. This is just a piece of wire looped around, and it's just going to short the ground to the positive. When he does that, the port immediately blows. Leaving it in after it's blown is harmless. It doesn't do anything, and you can see on the UI that those ports are now shown up in red. So while it looks physically the same on the board, the port is shown in red. The controller and the receiver are aware that that fuse actually blew rather than was turned off by the user. And by pressing and holding the button in then, he can clear that and the fuse is back on again. And he can do the same thing on the main board.
I don't have a 4-pin, sorry.
Oh, you don't have a 4-pin? All right, well, you can do the same thing at the main board. The difference is to reset it on the main board, you do hold the boot button in for a second, and that will clear the blown fuse and reset it. But as you saw, you can also do it from the web user interface as well. All right.
Test mode. Okay.
Okay. All right, what else? Let's go to the settings tab in the controller then. There's a couple of new settings in the settings tab that I did want to show you. Up the top here under port settings, there is now under the pixel blanking, there is the suppress output when no data is received. Historically, the controllers have always sent data out to the receivers and to the pixel ports. So when you're not receiving data, it's basically sending out zeros. If you check that checkbox, then what will happen is after the blanking time has elapsed, the controller will stop sending data out to the various pixels. Now, Dave has set the fuse hold time at 3 seconds. So that essentially means 8 seconds after he stops sending data to the controller, it will trip all the fuses and turn all of them off. I don't know if you still, are you sending data?
No.
You've got xLights turned off, yeah?
Yeah, I didn't hit save.
You've got it in test mode, haven't you?
I do.
Yeah, so it won't turn off when it's in test mode because obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense. But when the data stopped being, so the data's not being received, it's not in test mode, and so now all the fuses have kicked in and turned off. And there goes the smart receivers.
This one's in test, I think.
Good.
Local test.
Okay. So yeah, so that's how you can control it, and you can obviously change that fuse hold time. If you set the fuse hold time to -1, then you're basically saying to the receivers and to the main board that you never want it to disable the data sending, which is up to you. Or just don't never want it to turn off the fuses. So the other thing that you can do, if we can get the thing running again, Dave, either in test mode or whatever. You either have to put it in test mode or start xLights, one of the two. Then something needs to send it data. All right, so now we're running a color wash. So now we've had the visualize functionality in the controller for some time, but we've expanded the visualize functionality and made it a little bit easier to get to. So if you go back to the status page, Dave, you can right click on any one of those ports. So let's pick on 9 because that's got some pixels in it, and click on visualize, and it will bring up the visualize window. And the visualize window is essentially doing real-time monitoring of that port. Monitoring the current, and you know, obviously it's got the various details around the port. If you click on the count button, which Dave's obviously done before because it's already got a count, but if he clicks on the count button, it will run a counting pattern and come back and tell you that there's 100 pixels on that port, and that works on the smart receivers as well. Dave, if you scroll down a little, for some reason, only one of those smart receivers is showing up as connected. All right, yeah, sorry, click off it. Close it, escape, yep. Not sure why the second and third one aren't showing up. You can also click on the smart receiver. So if you want to click on the smart receiver, you can do the same thing. And it will monitor the smart receiver's current draw. So these are zeros because there's nothing plugged in on those ones. But if you go back to the one that had something plugged in, you can see it tells us what the voltage is. It gives us the processor temperature. You can also count the pixels on a smart receiver as well. You've got it in test mode locally, remember? Oh yeah, this is local, yeah. So now you can see as it goes through the various colors, you can see the different current draws. Right, so all of that is basically returning over the same Cat5 cable. So we haven't increased the amount of cabling that you need to do. The same Cat5 cable that you've historically run your smart receivers over is just acting in two directions now. The data is both being sent out to the pixels, but also the information about what's going on the smart receiver is being retrieved back from the smart receiver on a fairly regular basis. Not sure, Dave, there was anything else we wanted to show at this point?
No, does anybody have any other questions? I guess one point to mention is, let's go back over here, is that to upload firmware to the smart receivers, you would go here, you'd pick the smart receiver code, which we would provide for you. And then you select which chain you want to update, and it'll update all the receivers on any of the chains or all chains, and it updates them all within like 30 seconds because they tandemly get the firmware. So it's a pretty nice feature. I uploaded 3 of them last night. It took about 20 seconds over the wire. No need to go out anywhere.
And that's being backported to the V4 as well. So if you're buying the V5 receivers with the V4 board, you will still be able to update the firmware on the smart receivers.
Am I mistaken in thinking that previously a banner would come up and say there's firmware to update, or is that not the case? No.
Yes, but not for the smart receivers. For the controller, yes, but I don't always push out the alert. I can publish firmware without pushing out the alert. I only push out the alert when we're very, very comfortable with it. Because I don't want lots of people upgrading and then having issues.
Sure. We're just getting some more people in the Zoom room lately, and just like we're not sure if what version they should be running, etc. And so the firmware would be available on the GitHub, I assume, or Pixel Controller latest firmware sort of thing.
The V4, so there's a V4 GitHub for the V4. There will be a new GitHub for the V5 when it comes out.
Right.
As you probe each one, it'll tell you which build they're on. So if you had a mixture of different builds out in the field, you could easily tell which one any particular smart receiver is by just clicking on it, and it shows you all the different parameters of that particular receiver. One is the firmware build number. One thing that it does do is it auto detects when something's not visible. So you see, as I plug the C receiver, we go back to the user interface, you'll see the C receiver should see how it turned red right there.
Yeah.
And when you plug it back in, also notice that when the data was pulled, it didn't take too long for the fuses to go and you know, be inactive.
The other thing that it does when it's doing pixel counting, one of the challenges with pixel counting, which is largely done by current reading, is that if you do any power injection onto the prop, it can actually be very hard to do pixel counting on those props, because it just, you know, the power injection throws out the current readings and it's unable to determine what's going on. Because of these external boards, when you pixel count, it actually disables the power injection. So as long as all of your power at the end of the day is connected together, if you're not using two power supplies to run your power, then you should be able to count even quite large props and get the pixel count correct.
The idea behind this wire going to the distro is that when the receiver all four
over a little bit, because yeah, that's it.
When the receiver, all four ports of the receiver get blown, then it turns off the distro. It's like, okay, well, there's no power coming here. So that would happen at the end of the night when the controller turns off the power to the receiver, or, you know, for some reason you blew all four ports, but typically that wouldn't happen. So normally it's whenever the controller turns off the receiver. The moment that the air is cleared, you only need to have one of them still working for the distro to, and that's just a simple 2-wire. The distros themselves, if you don't have a receiver connected to it, automatically boot up and they're turned on. And wish I had a way to blow one. But that's how you reset the fuses if you don't have a receiver connected to it to control it. Kind of acts the same way that this wire from the receiver or the controller would work. The controller's got 2 of those ports. Although you can connect multiple distribution boards to just one port, because it's a very high impedance type input to the distro board. So
the lights down so you can see the video, because it's over the video. It's hard to say.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's better.
Okay. Well, hope that wasn't a waste.
Oh well. Right, yeah. So when he blows the 4th one, they all go, because the receiver knows that if all the ports are out, then the receiver should be out. Sorry, the power ejection should be out.
And it's being actively controlled too. So even though I reset it here at the board, it's not going to reset because it's being controlled by the receiver. The moment you pull the plug, though, the board will go back into normal mode, which is, possibly the typical, the advantage of this over the distros that we've sold in the past is that not only do they have the ability to be externally controlled, but, you have the e-fuse capability and don't have to replace fuses on those either.
There are a couple questions in chat, but I think I'm assuming it's Daryl C has been answering them. But one of the questions or suggestions was whether the remote receivers could be triggered based on being too hot, i.e. in a confined space in an ammo box. Is that even a possibility or consideration, or?
Yeah, the code's in there but commented out at the moment. But yes, it's possible.
Yeah. That's another advantage of the dual communication is all this is possible. You could, for instance, have the ability of having the controller, configured with that information and then sent over to the receiver.
Yeah, in fact, that that timeout on data reception that you set in the UI is actually sent to the receiver when the receiver comes online, so that the receiver knows that when it doesn't see data for 6 seconds or whatever it is that you've typed into the controller UI, that's how the receiver should behave. So by default, it's 60 seconds. So if you plug it into a controller that doesn't support that, by default, it will disable all the ports after 60 seconds of no data, but you can change that, including forcing it never to turn off. But you can only do that with a controller that can send the configuration to it.
So that would, sounds like that suggestion would just be another parameter in the controller under settings where you could set the receiver temperature shutdown temp.
Yeah. So there was a couple of questions in chat there. So no, the form factor of the e-fuses is they're chips. They're not pluggable, etc. They're just chips that are mounted onto the back of the board. It might have been
You could
one
see,
other
maybe
question.
you could see one right here, maybe.
Oh yeah, they're on the front of the receiver board. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about other controllers and just swapping out the fuses. Feasible?
No, not really. Well, not with the control. Can you read the power draw through the power injection boards in the UI? No, you can't. The power injection boards have the fuses, but we don't monitor the current from them. It wasn't clean at 10 o'clock last night when I was looking at it, Scott.
Yeah, it looks like it's new building. It looks very nice. Yeah, upstairs probably, right?
It's what you don't see behind the camera, guys. It's all about perspective.
No, I'm actually on
It's
the
all about
downstairs. This is
perspective.
my backyard.
There you
Looking
go.
out the side window of the garage.
Yeah.
Now I have like a office downstairs in the office area. But you're right, Daryl. It's all show business.
My wife was a work from home school teacher. I know the concept. It's like, okay, the web camera will show this. Everything is like 1 foot to the left and 1 foot to the right.
That's how all those pundits roll too.
So, okay, Dave, you want to stop sharing then? There's a couple other things I want to go over. So which are not so much about the V5, but actually apply to the V4 and the V5, which are things that that are probably worth covering that people may or may not know. So availability, a few people were probably going to ask that. Dave, I believe you've put them up for sale on the website today, at least the F16, the SRX 1, 2, and the power distribution boards. Like I said, the 32s and the 48s and the SRX4, which is the 16-port 4 smart receiver boards, they're going to come later this year, and probably so late that you may as well read that as early 2024.
I have high hopes for the F48 version 5, though, that coming out in early November, somewhere in that time frame. So yeah, it's late, but I don't know.
Some bonus material. So a couple of things that I'm not sure people necessarily understand if you've got a Falcon, but some things that are worthwhile being aware of. The things that in the test mode here, there are a couple of test patterns here that are really, really useful. There's this number test mode and the SR number test mode. These things are really useful when troubleshooting what's going on, when things aren't working quite the way you expect. The number test mode will light up the number of pixels respective to the port that the particular prop is plugged into. I've lost count of the number of times I personally and have seen others mix up port 1 and 2 on the controller, and they think it's plugged into 1, but it's actually plugged into 2. And using the number test mode, which totally ignores how the port's been configured, so it basically will light up the number of pixels regardless of whether you've got the configuration set to 0 pixels or not. It will push out the data for the number of pixels of the port that you've plugged the prop into, and can be a great way to either work out which port it's plugged into because you're just not sure, or validate that it is plugged into the port that you think it's plugged into. The SR number one is a slightly different test pattern, which is available from the controller, and it's used with your smart receivers. And what this will do is it will in a pattern that's displayed on the lights, and I won't go through that pattern because you can read it in the manual, but basically it will show you what the smart receiver is set at, whether it's set at A, B, C, D, E, or F, and also which port on that smart receiver that particular prop is plugged into, and then the overall port number that it is plugged into on relative to the controller. So if it's in port 41, it'll light up 41 pixels, but it will also light up the number of pixels relative to the port on the smart receiver and the like. So really useful test modes for troubleshooting that I think a lot of people miss and are not aware of. The other thing that you can see on the smart receiver, on the controller, and most people wouldn't do it, is this question mark alongside the pixel protocol. In my earlier presentation, I talked about the compatibility of pixels and which chips are similar to which other chips. All of that data is actually available on your Falcon controller here, where it will show you the pixel type. This is the pixel type that you would choose in the Falcon controller. And then here are all the various chip types that would be compatible with that protocol, along with the channels, the bits per channel, the number of wires that those pixels have, and any maximums or limits that might be in place on the Falcon. As you get into the more esoteric protocols, some of those things vary significantly, like the TLS 3001. We can only drive 288 of those when you would normally be able to drive 1,024 WS2811s. Right, but there's a whole bunch of additional information here which is inbuilt into every controller that you can access if you're looking for that information. The other thing that people don't necessarily realize here is that there are a couple of key shortcuts on the Pixel Ports page that can be really, really useful. If I want to change all of these ports to be 50 pixels and, I don't know, 70%, right? If I want to copy that down to the next row, I would press F2 and it will copy it down, and it will copy all those values down and increment the channel number. But I can also come up here and hold down the Shift and F2 keys down, Shift and F2 key down, which will copy that number all the way to the bottom. So if you're just using the controller in test and you want to do a quick set of all the channel numbers, etc., F2 and Shift F2 can be really useful. But if you don't want to change everything, let's say you just want to change the brightness back to 30%, you can also do a Shift F3 when you clicked on that field, and it will copy just that one value down its column. If I want to set the end nulls of everything to 1, press 1 in there, Shift F3, and it copies it down across all of the strings. So yeah, if you're configuring through xLights, of course, no big deal. You're not going to be doing that. You're going to be uploading it from xLights. But if you are doing it manually, that can save you a little bit of time. Another hint or tip, we'll leave that. If you're not using Wi-Fi, and you can use Wi-Fi to access all the website, etc., but if you're not using Wi-Fi on your controller, I strongly recommend you turn Wi-Fi off. What that will do is it will hold the Wi-Fi chip in a reset mode and basically will not do anything. The beauty of this is twofold. One is obviously it doesn't clutter up your Wi-Fi spectrum with yet another Wi-Fi device. But the Wi-Fi device is also spending its time talking to the controller, and shutting off Wi-Fi if you're not using it just means there's one less thing for the controller to have to deal with. So I would always turn off Wi-Fi if you're not using it. Saving the raw configuration. Now this is hard to do. I can't really show this, but you've all seen, no doubt, the ability here to save the settings. And if you click on Save Settings here, it will download onto your computer a JSON file, which is now in my Downloads folder. My computer will come up. So it will download this JSON file here, which is the controller configuration, right? Which you can then upload later. But there is another way to save the configuration of your controller, which provides an actual perfect representation of your controller's configuration. Whereas when you download this way, it downloads most of the data, but there's a few things that it won't override when you re-upload it. And that is by holding down the left and right buttons when you power up the controller. If you've got an SD card in, then the controller will actually prompt you to save the controller configuration to a file on the SD card, which you can then restore in a similar manner. And that provides you with a perfect snapshot of the controller's configuration. And the ideal thing about that is it's stored with the controller so that, you know, if you ever have to restore it, it's already on the controller, ready to go. The other thing we use it for is in troubleshooting. And so if you run into issues and we can't reproduce your problem, we'll occasionally get you to run through that process, produce that file and send it to us, because that file allows us to 100% accurately restore our controllers to the same state that your controller is in, which makes troubleshooting significantly easier to do. Falcon Manager. So Falcon Manager is, I have not formally released this yet, and it's more by request, but we have written a command line utility which you can use to manage fleets of Falcon controllers. So if you have a large collection of V3 or V4 and in the future V5 controllers, and you want to do things like bulk uploads, if you want to be able to take a Falcon V3 configuration and upload it to a V4 and have it work correctly, or vice versa, this command line utility, which can then be scripted, it's essentially designed and built for large displays, drive-throughs and the like. It's designed to be a utility to significantly simplify the management of a large fleet of controllers. So if anyone wants that, you just need to contact support at pixelcontroller.com and we can make it available. Dave talked about Visualize and kind of showed it, but you know, it's actually been around for a long time. On the V4, the Visualize button sits up here, but now it's up on the main tab. The power of Visualize is very much like the original visualizer in xLights, in that it shows you all the string definitions. If there were virtual strings here, they would be all split up separately. It shows you exactly the same sorts of information that xLights would have shown you. The smart receivers, again, it will show you each of those. And you can see visually here how much of the maximum pixels that I can configure on a given port I've actually consumed. So as I consume them up and get up towards the maximum, obviously I'll reach the end of the gray bar. So it can be a useful way. And now with the new ones, it's obviously the way in which I can drill in and bring up the monitor. So I can monitor individual local pixel ports, or I can monitor smart receivers by just clicking on the smart receiver. The reason the smart receiver is down here is because you can have multiple virtual strings on each smart receiver, and they would appear as different colored bars at the top here. The visualizer is available today in the V4 as well. It won't have all of that drill in though in the V4 ever. And finally, tools inside the Pixel Controller GitHub for the Falcon 16 V4. There are a number of utility programs that you can download. These are just the Windows ones because I knocked them out pretty quickly on Windows. So there's a utility here that will take that downloaded configuration and make it much more human readable. So if you want to look at see an explanation of what's inside that file, it'll make it a lot easier. There is the FPP sync visualizer. So, you know, whether you're using FPP or Falcon or whatever, if you'd like to be able to see the sync packets that are flying around your network, the FPP sync visualizer will monitor what's on the network and show you what's going on. FSCQ dump will take an FSCQ file and basically dump out all the headers for you, so you can see exactly what's in that FSCQ file. And then this reader here will dump out the details that are in the playlist files that are stored on the SD card on the Falcon controller. And then there's another program here called Falcon Monitor, which will actually monitor multiple V4 controllers. And in fact, coming here, we're actually building a web monitor in here where you will be able to list multiple controllers in here and see all the voltage and temperature graphs in one page. You just add in the IP addresses of your various controllers. And we're looking at what we do with this in terms of all the new work with fuses, etc., and how we might expand this. So just a couple of bonus material things that I figured while I had you here and knowing that I wouldn't be able to fill a full hour on the V5, I just thought I'd share.
All right, Keith, we've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody wants to throw some questions at you, here you go. There's your chance. All right, then we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much. It's been a long day for you, I'm sure, Keith. And thank you, Mr. David Pitts as well.